Picture this: you're standing in the dim glow of an ancient burial chamber, surrounded by walls awash in colors so vivid they seem to pulse with life, even after thousands of years. The air is thick with history, and every shade, every stroke of pigment whispers secrets of a civilization long gone. This isn't just decoration. These colors were chosen with purpose, each hue a carefully crafted message from the past. From the deep lapis lazuli blue that cradled Egyptian pharaohs in their journey to the afterlife, to the rich crimson that adorned the tombs of Chinese emperors as a symbol of power and protection, every color tells a story. And not just any story. These are tales of love, loss, divinity, and the unyielding human desire to transcend death itself. What if I told you that these ancient colors weren't just about beauty? They were a language, one that spoke of emotions so profound, they shaped the way entire cultures honored their dead. Think about it. When you walk into a room painted a certain color, it changes how you feel. A soft yellow might lift your spirits, while a dark gray could make the space feel solemn. Now imagine that power magnified 1,000-fold, infused with the weight of eternity. That's exactly what ancient rulers did. They used color to communicate with the gods, to comfort the living, and to ensure their legacy would endure. The blues weren't just blues, they were promises of rebirth. The golds weren't merely decorative, they were rays of the divine, meant to guide the departed into the next world. So why does this matter to us today? Because these colors are more than relics of the past. They're a mirror reflecting the universal human experience, our fears, our hopes, our need to make sense of life and death. When you see the vibrant ochres in an Aztec tomb or the stark whites of a Roman mausoleum, you're not just looking at paint, you're witnessing the emotions of people who lived centuries ago, yet felt things deeply, just like we do. And that's what we're about to explore. Over the next few minutes, we'll step into these sacred spaces together, decoding the hidden meanings behind every shade. By the end, you'll never look at color the same way again. Because once you understand the language of these ancient hues, you'll see history, and maybe even life itself, in a whole new light. Take the color blue in ancient Egypt. It wasn't just a pigment pulled from the earth. It was a divine gift, a piece of the heavens brought down to earth. The Egyptians sourced their most sacred blue from lapis lazuli, a stone so rare it had to be imported from thousands of miles away. Why go to such lengths? Because to them, this deep, celestial blue wasn't just beautiful, it was the color of the night sky, the realm of the gods, and the waters of creation itself. When they painted burial chambers with it, they weren't just decorating, they were building a bridge between this world and the next. Every stroke of blue on a pharaoh's tomb was an invitation for the gods to recognize and welcome their ruler into eternity. Now cross the globe to ancient China, where yellow wasn't merely a shade, it was the emperor's exclusive right. Reserved for royalty, this golden hue symbolized the center of the universe, the very heart of power. In death as in life, Chinese emperors were wrapped in yellow silks, their tombs adorned with yellow tiles, ensuring their authority would remain unchallenged even in the afterlife. This wasn't vanity, it was cosmology. The Chinese believed yellow connected them to the Earth's fertile core, a source of stability and prosperity. To strip an emperor of this color would have been unthinkable, like severing their bond with the divine. And then there's red, a color that pulsed with life even in the stillness of death. For the Romans, crimson wasn't just bold, it was protective. They painted tombs with red ochre, a pigment believed to ward off evil spirits and preserve the soul's vitality. In Mesoamerica, the Maya used vibrant reds to mimic the lifeblood of sacrifice, a sacred exchange meant to nourish the gods and ensure the cycle of rebirth. These cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, shared an unshakable belief: color wasn't passive. It could shield, it could plead, it could command. What's fascinating is how these meanings shifted from one civilization to another. Green in Egypt meant resurrection, the lush rebirth of crops after the Nile's flood. But in medieval Europe, green could symbolize both life and decay, a duality that kept it off many royal tombs. These choices weren't arbitrary. They were rooted in each culture's deepest fears and highest hopes, a visual language of the soul. When we stand in these tombs today, we're not just seeing colors, we're hearing whispers of what these people valued most: protection, power, a chance to live again. And that's the key: these colors weren't chosen by artists alone. They were selected by priests, astronomers, even rulers on their deathbeds, all desperate to leave one last, indelible mark. The next time you see an image of an ancient tomb, don't just admire the artistry. Look closer. That blue, it's a prayer. That gold, a crown woven from sunlight. Every hue is a key, waiting to unlock the stories of those who believed color could shape destiny itself. The deep blues of ancient Egypt weren't just colors, they were portals. When artisans ground lapis lazuli into pigment, they weren't simply mixing paint. They were pulverizing the night sky itself, turning stars into dust to adorn the walls of eternity. This wasn't decoration, it was alchemy. Every stroke of blue in a pharaoh's tomb transformed stone into cosmos, wrapping the departed ruler in the very fabric of the divine. The ceiling of Seti I's burial chamber, for example, wasn't painted blue to be pretty. It was a meticulously crafted map of the heavens, with constellations and deities woven into the pigment, a celestial roadmap for the pharaoh's soul to follow into the afterlife. But why this obsession with blue? Because to the Egyptians, color wasn't symbolic, it was functional. Blue didn't just represent water or the sky, it became water, became sky. When they painted the god Ammon with lapis blue skin, they weren't suggesting he was like the heavens. They believed the pigment literally contained his essence, that the crushed stone carried the god's power within its particles. This is why Tutankhamun's death mask shines with those iconic stripes of blue and gold, not as mere ornamentation, but as armor. The gold was the flesh of the gods, the blue was their breath. Together, they formed an unbreakable barrier against chaos, ensuring the young king's safe passage through the perilous underworld. The rarity of these pigments only heightened their sacredness. Lapis lazuli had to travel nearly 2,000 miles from the mountains of Afghanistan, passing through countless hands before reaching the Nile. Imagine the cost, not just in gold but in human labor. Caravans braved deserts and bandits to transport these stones. Also, pharaohs could be buried with fragments of the cosmos. And it wasn't just lapis. Egyptian artisans mastered the art of creating synthetic blues, mixing silica, lime, and copper to produce a vibrant turquoise that mimicked the life-giving waters of the Nile. These weren't cheap imitations, they were technological marvels, born from a culture that believed if they could replicate a color, they could harness its magic. Look closer at any Egyptian burial scene, and you'll notice something striking. The gods are always blue, but the people are golden or reddish-brown. This wasn't an artistic choice. It was a theological one. Blue was the exclusive domain of the divine, a visual boundary between mortal and immortal. When a pharaoh was depicted with blue accents, a headdress, a necklace, it wasn't vanity. It was a declaration: this ruler walks in both worlds. Even the Book of the Dead, that ancient guide to the afterlife, instructs the deceased to recite spells while wearing blue faience amulets, as if the color itself could amplify their words into the ears of the gods. What's truly humbling is how these beliefs transcended time. Centuries after the last pyramid was built, Roman emperors still coveted Egyptian blue, grinding down tomb paintings to reuse the pigment in their own art. The color outlived the civilization that perfected it, carrying whispers of the Nile into distant lands. Today, when we gaze at these blues in museums, we're not just seeing paint. We're witnessing the remnants of a world where color was a living force, where artisans didn't just create art, but conjured portals to eternity with every brushstroke. Gold wasn't just a metal in Mesopotamia, it was divine sunlight made solid, a physical manifestation of the gods' eternal radiance. When Mesopotamian rulers were laid to rest, their tombs shimmered with gold, not as a display of wealth, but as a sacred language. Every golden bead, every gilded dagger whispered the same promise. This ruler was no ordinary mortal. Take Queen Puabi's burial in the royal cemetery of Ur, where her body was draped in a cloak of gold, a literal second skin woven from thousands of delicate gold rings. This wasn't extravagance, it was transformation. The Sumerians believed that by wrapping their queen in gold, they were encasing her in the immortal flesh of the deities she would join. What made gold so special to these ancient people? Unlike silver or bronze, gold never tarnished. It resisted decay, just as the gods resisted death. In a world where everything faded, where clay tablets crumbled and fabrics rotted, gold remained untouched by time. That's why Mesopotamian kings, like those of the Akkadian Empire, were buried with golden crowns pressed into their brows. The weight wasn't just ceremonial, it was a metaphysical seal, marking them as eternal sovereigns in the afterlife. Even their weapons were gilded, not for battle, but for the spiritual warfare of the underworld. A golden axe wasn't a tool, it was a key, forged to open the gates of divine judgment. But here's where it gets fascinating. The Mesopotamians didn't just use gold, they mythologized its origins. Their creation epic, the Enuma Elish, describes gold as formed from the tears of the gods, a celestial substance wept into the earth during cosmic battles. This wasn't poetry, it was sacred science. When artisans hammered gold into funerary masks, they weren't crafting, they were reenacting creation itself. The famous death mask of the Assyrian king Ashurnasirpal II, for example, wasn't a portrait. It was a ritual object, its burnished surface designed to reflect the face of the sun god Shamash back to the heavens, a beacon guiding the king's soul home. And then there's the gold's role in the afterlife economy. Mesopotamians buried their dead with golden cups and plates, not as grave goods, but as currency. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes the underworld as a place where shadows traded in gold, not for earthly luxuries, but for divine favor. A golden bracelet wasn't just jewelry, it was a bribe for the gatekeepers of eternity. This belief was so entrenched that when archaeologists opened the tomb of the Neo-Sumerian king Shulgi, they found his sarcophagus lined with gold foil. Not for show, for survival, the foil acted as a conductive layer, channeling divine energy into his remains to sustain him on his journey, the most striking detail. Gold's scarcity made it sacred. Unlike Egypt with its Nubian mines, Mesopotamia had to import every ounce of gold through treacherous trade routes stretching to Anatolia and beyond. That's why royal tombs often contain just thin sheets of gold leaf. A king's entire afterlife might depend on a layer no thicker than a petal, but this limitation bred creativity. Sumerian metallurgists invented techniques like gold granulation, fusing microscopic beads onto surfaces to make the most of each precious gram. The result? Objects that didn't just gleam, they pulsed with light, as if animated by the gods themselves. When we see these golden artifacts in museums today, it's easy to miss their true power. That delicate gold headdress from Queen Puabi's tomb, it wasn't meant to dazzle the living. It was designed to blind the demons of the underworld with holy radiance. Every golden artifact was a battery storing divine energy to fuel the dead through eternity. So the next time you admire Mesopotamian gold, remember, you're not looking at treasure. You're witnessing the oldest alchemy of all, humanity's attempt to turn metal into immortality. While gold shimmered with divine promise and blue pulsed with celestial energy, ancient Chinese rulers embraced a far more solemn hue, black. Not the absence of color, but its own powerful presence. In the courts of Imperial China, black wasn't just darkness, it was the color of the underworld, of quiet wisdom, of the deep waters that sustained life even as they concealed its mysteries. When Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the first ruler to unify China, designed his sprawling mausoleum guarded by the silent terracotta army, he didn't choose gold or red, the colors of power and joy. He chose black. This was no accident. In Chinese cosmology, black represented water, one of the 5 sacred elements. Water was paradox, both destructive and life-giving, unpredictable yet essential. It carved canyons but also nourished crops. For Qin Shi Huang, who obsessed over immortality, black became the perfect metaphor. His tomb's use of black lacquered wood and dark stone wasn't mournful, it was strategic. Water, in Taoist philosophy, was the element of adaptability, of flowing around obstacles. By saturating his burial chamber in black, the emperor wasn't just preparing for death, he was arming himself with its wisdom, ensuring his spirit could navigate the unseen currents of the afterlife. But black's significance ran deeper than philosophy. It was woven into the fabric of Chinese mourning rituals. While commoners wore plain white to funerals, emperors and nobles draped themselves in black silk, not as a surrender to grief, but as a shield against it. The color absorbed chaos, much like water absorbs light. When archaeologists uncovered the tomb of the Han Dynasty's Emperor Jing, they found layers of blackened bronze mirrors placed near his remains. These weren't decorative, they were spiritual tools. Polished to a dark sheen, they were believed to reflect away malevolent spirits, their Inkai surfaces acting as portals to trap harmful energies. What's striking is how differently China treated black compared to other ancient cultures. In Egypt, black symbolized fertile soil, rebirth. In Rome, it was the color of mourning with no deeper meaning. But in China, black held duality. It was the void before creation and the depths where secrets gathered. The terracotta warriors guarding Qin Shi Huang's tomb weren't originally the reddish clay we see today. Many were painted with black armor, their uniforms blending into the shadows, an eternal patrol standing guard between worlds. Perhaps most revealing is how later dynasties subverted black's meaning. By the Tang dynasty, imperial tombs began favoring bright colors, rebelling against black solemnity. But even then, traces remained, a black jade seal placed in a ruler's hand, or a single obsidian pillar marking the tomb's entrance. These weren't relics of tradition, they were anchors, because in the end, no matter how much gold dazzled or crimson energized, every emperor knew black was the color that would greet them last, the hue of the underworld's gates, and the first shade they'd need to master on the other side. The vibrant reds of Mayan royal tombs weren't just decorative, they were life itself, preserved in pigment. When archaeologists uncover these burial chambers, they often find skeletons bathed in crimson, their bones stained deep red as if dipped in sunset. This wasn't an artistic choice, it was a spiritual transfusion. The Maya saw blood as the sacred currency of existence. the liquid thread connecting kings to their gods, ancestors, and the very cycle of rebirth. Every scarlet stroke in a burial chamber whispered the same truth. Death wasn't an end, but a transformation fueled by the same vital force that pulsed through living veins. Consider the tomb of the great Mayan ruler Pakal in Palenque, discovered beneath the Temple of Inscriptions. His sarcophagus wasn't just painted red, it was drowned in it, caked with layers of cinnabar so thick they seeped into his bones. This mineral, mined from distant mountains and traded like treasure, carried more than color. It held the essence of the sun, the heat of sacrifice, and the promise of resurrection. The Maya believed cinnabar's mercury content mirrored the liquid metal found in sacrificial bowls, making it a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds. When they packed Pakal's tomb with this pigment, they weren't preserving a corpse, they were recharging a battery, ensuring his soul would emerge renewed when the gods called him back. But red's power went deeper than symbolism. The Maya developed sophisticated techniques to bind their pigments with tree resins and clays, creating paints that clung to stone for centuries. In the tomb of the Kapon ruler Smoke-Emix, walls blaze with hematite red, a mineral ground so finely it seems to glow from within. This wasn't mere craftsmanship, it was alchemy. Hematite's metallic sheen mirrored the reflective surfaces of sacred mirrors used by Mayan priests to commune with spirits. By coating burial chambers in this lustrous red, they transformed entire rooms into portals, their shimmering walls acting as membranes between worlds. The most striking detail, red wasn't just for kings. Commoners' graves often contained traces of red ochre, showing this belief permeated all levels of society. The difference lay in scale and intensity. While farmers might have a handful of red pigment scattered in their graves, kings like Turquoise or Chan Kayahuil were entombed in veritable oceans of crimson. Their bodies, artifacts, even the walls around them saturated with the color. This wasn't extravagance but necessity. In Mayan cosmology, rulers weren't just political figures, they were living conduits between humanity and the divine. Their deaths required an explosion of red, a final, dramatic release of the life force they'd stewarded for their people. What's haunting is how these beliefs echo across time. Modern Maya still use red in rituals, tying crimson threads around wrists to ward off illness or painting doorways with red dye for protection. The specifics have evolved, but the core idea remains. Red isn't just a color. It's a living force, as vital today as it was when kings were buried in temples beneath the jungle's green canopy. When we see these ancient tombs now, their reds faded but still fierce, we're not just looking at paint. We're witnessing the remnants of a world where death wasn't feared, where every scarlet stroke was a love letter to eternity, written in the indelible ink of belief. The pure white marble of a Roman sarcophagus wasn't just stone, it was a mirror held up to eternity. Unlike the vibrant reds of Mayan kings or the celestial blues of Egypt, the Romans chose a color that spoke in whispers rather than shouts. White wasn't merely absence, it was potential, the blank slate of the underworld waiting to be rewritten with the deeds of the departed. When an emperor like Augustus was laid to rest in his gleaming alabaster urn, the message was clear. This wasn't an end, but a purification, a soul scrubbed clean of mortal flaws and ready to ascend. What made white so powerful in Roman funerary art? It began with the gods themselves. Statues of Jupiter and Venus were carved from the finest Parian marble, their luminous surfaces reflecting divine perfection. By burying their nobles in white stone, the Romans weren't just honoring the dead, they were disguising them as deities. The famous sarcophagus of Constantina, daughter of Emperor Constantine, shows this transformation in action. Its snowy surface is carved with grapevines and cherubs, not as decoration, but as proof evidence that her soul had joined Bacchus' eternal revelry in the afterlife. The marble wasn't a container, it was a costume, dressing the deceased for their new role among the immortals. But white's duality is what made it truly fascinating. In daily life, Romans wore white togas during elections to symbolize integrity, yet those same pale garments were worn by mourners at funerals. This wasn't a contradiction, it was a profound statement about death's nature. Just as a white tablet could be erased and reused, so too could the soul be cleansed and reborn. The lararium shrines in Roman homes where ancestors were worshipped were often faced with white stucco, not to memorialize death, but to celebrate the ongoing dialogue between the living and the purified dead. The materials themselves tell a story of devotion. Roman artisans didn't just use any white stone, they sought out the rarest varieties. The best sarcophagi came from quarries in Luna, where marble gleamed with an almost translucent quality under torchlight. These blocks were so coveted that they became status symbols. Long before death, wealthy senators would display unfinished sarcophagi in their gardens as proof of their piety and taste. When the time came, these same stones would be hollowed into vessels for eternity, their interiors lined with lead to seal impurity, their exteriors carved with scenes of heroic feats, not from the deceased's life, but from mythology. The message, in death, every noble became a Theseus or Hercules, their mortal flaws whitened away like stains lifted from cloth. Perhaps the most poignant use of white wasn't in grand imperial tombs, but in the humblest of burials. Roman children were often buried with white terracotta dolls, their painted faces washed clean of color. These weren't toys, they were guides, meant to lead young souls through the shadowy underworld by reflecting whatever light existed there. Even in poverty, families scraped together coins for a handful of white lime to sprinkle over graves, a makeshift marble transforming dirt into something sacred. When we stand before these white monuments today, their surfaces worn by centuries, it's easy to miss their radical optimism. The Egyptians built fortresses of color to protect their dead. The Maya drowned tombs in red to fuel rebirth, but the Romans, they chose white because they believed in the possibility of starting over. Every pale urn was a promise that endings could be spotless, that memory could be perfected, and that death, ultimately, was just another form of morning light. In the shadowy depths of Byzantine tombs, one color reigned supreme, a hue so rare, so coveted, that wearing it without imperial permission was punishable by death. Purple, but this wasn't just any shade. Tyrian purple, extracted from the glands of thousands of sea snails, took weeks to produce just a single gram of dye. The labor alone made it more valuable than gold, but its true power lay in what it represented. When a Byzantine emperor was wrapped in purple silk for burial, it wasn't a display of wealth, it was a cosmic handshake between heaven and earth, a visual contract signed in the blood of mollusks. The process of creating this sacred color was almost alchemical. Workers harvested mucus from the spiny Dimurex, a sea creature found along the Phoenician coast. The liquid, colorless at first, transformed when exposed to sunlight, first yellow, then green, and finally that deep, resonant purple the Romans called purpura. Imagine the spectacle, artisans stirring vats of this precious brew like priests conducting a sacrament, knowing each drop could dye the hem of an emperor's shroud. The Byzantines didn't just wear purple, they weaponized it. Emperors like Justinian I issued laws reserving its use exclusively for the imperial family, turning their funeral garments into declarations of divinity. But why this obsession with purple? Because in Byzantine eyes, color wasn't just symbolic, it was synesthetic. Purple didn't just represent power, it vibrated with it. The shimmer of a royal burial shroud in candlelight wasn't merely decorative, It was meant to mimic the luminous aura of saints in religious mosaics. When Empress Theodora was laid to rest in her purple-lined sarcophagus, the message was clear. She wasn't just joining her ancestors, she was taking her place among celestial royalty. Even the Church recognized purple's dual nature, using it for both Lenten penitence and the robes of Christ in resurrection scenes. This duality made it perfect for death rituals, mournful yet triumphant, human yet transcendent. The most striking examples come from the mausoleum of Constantine, where archaeologists found fragments of purple-dyed wool clinging to sarcophagi. Scientific analysis revealed something extraordinary. These weren't just dipped in dye. Byzantine dyers mastered a technique called double dyeing, first staining fibers with indigo blue, then over-dyeing with red from the murex. The result: a purple so deep it seemed to absorb light, a color you could drown in. This wasn't fashion, it was physics. The Byzantines believed such intense hues could trap spiritual energy, creating a protective cocoon around the deceased. Perhaps no artifact demonstrates purple's sacred weight better than the porphyry stone used in imperial tombs. Quarried from a single Egyptian mountain, this deep reddish-purple rock was so associated with emperors that, born in the purple, became shorthand for legitimate heirs. When Constantine VII was entombed in a porphyry sarcophagus, the stone didn't just mark his status, it became his eternal throne. The stone's crystalline structure, glittering with embedded minerals, was thought to pulse with the same life force that animated the cosmos. What's haunting is how purple's meaning shifted after the fall of Byzantium. Crusaders looted imperial tombs, stripping purple silks to repurpose as church vestments, unwittingly transferring the color's sacred power from kings to clerics. Today, when we see fragments of these textiles in museums, their hues faded to rusty brown, it's easy to forget their original glory. But for a moment, try to imagine them fresh, the way they would have looked by torchlight, draped over an emperor's still form. Not just fabric, but a bridge between worlds, dyed in the very essence of empire. Beneath the emerald hills of ancient Britain and Ireland, Celtic chieftains slept their eternal rest wrapped in a color more precious than gold green. Not the bright greens of spring leaves, but the deep, mossy hues of the earth itself, the kind of green that lingers in shadowed glens and riverbeds. For the Celts, this wasn't just a color. It was the very pulse of the land, a visual incantation linking the dead to the cycles of nature. When a chieftain was laid to rest with malachite beads at his throat or a jade amulet on his chest, it wasn't mere adornment. These green stones were seeds planted with the body, meant to sprout anew in the afterlife. The connection between green and rebirth ran deep in Celtic cosmology. Unlike the Egyptians with their celestial blues or the Chinese with their imperial yellows, the Celts saw divinity not in distant heavens, but in the soil beneath their feet. Their burial mounds, those mysterious round barrows dotting the countryside, weren't just tombs, they were wombs. The green stones placed inside serpentine, jadate, even simple river-worn pebbles stained with algae acted as spiritual fertilizers, nourishing the soul's journey back into the world. Archaeologists have uncovered chieftains buried with fist-sized chunks of greenstone, their surfaces carved with spirals that mirrored the twisting roots of oaks. These weren't decorations, they were maps guiding the dead through the underworld's labyrinth toward rebirth. What's fascinating is how green straddled two worlds in Celtic belief. It represented both decay and vitality, the mold on a fallen log and the new shoots bursting from it. This duality made it the perfect color for death rituals. The famous Gundestrup cauldron, that silver masterpiece of Celtic art, shows this balance in action. Amidst its intricate panels, deities' clutch talks the color of oxidized copper, their greenish hue symbolizing both the tarnish of time and the eternal vitality of the gods. When a chieftain was buried with a bronze shield patinated green, it wasn't neglect, it was alchemy. The Celts believed the green corrosion was the metal returning to the earth, just as the warrior's spirit would return to the cycle of life. The rituals surrounding these green burials reveal even deeper layers. At the burial site of a Welsh chieftain in Anglesey, excavators found not just green stones, but layers of freshly cut turf placed beneath the body. This wasn't padding, it was a direct transfusion of living energy. The Celts believed grass roots could stitch the soul back into the land's fabric. Similarly, in Ireland's County Meath, high-status graves often contained bundles of yew or holly leaves, evergreens that refused death even in winter's grip. These weren't funeral wreaths as we know them today, they were immortality charms, their persistent greenness a promise that the soul would likewise endure. Perhaps the most poignant example comes from the Scottish Highlands, where a young woman was buried around 2,000 years ago. Her grave held no gold, no weapons, just a single green glass bead placed between her ribs as if planted near her heart. Analysis showed the glass originated from the Mediterranean, traded across hundreds of miles to reach her remote village. That tiny bead, its sea green hue fading but still visible after millennia, tells us everything. For the Celts, green wasn't just a color, it was a covenant with the earth, a pact written in chlorophyll and stone that said, "You will leave, but you will also return." This belief echoes in places like Newgrange, where the Great Passage Tomb's entrance stone swirls with greenish lichen, nature's own reclaiming of sacred art. Modern visitors often mistake it for weathering, but look closer. Those organic greens aren't defacing the ancient spirals, they're completing them just as the Celts intended. Because in the end, their burial rites weren't about resisting decay, but embracing it, trusting that from every earthy green grave, something new would always grow. High in the Andean peaks, where the air thins and sunlight strikes with almost physical force, the Inca wove yellow into the very fabric of eternity. For them, this wasn't just the color of maize or ripe fruit, it was the living breath of Inti, the sun god captured in metal and mineral. When an Incan ruler was prepared for burial, artisans would spend months hammering gold into delicate foils to adorn the mummy bundle, each sheet a miniature sun disk meant to mimic the god's radiance. But here's what's astonishing, these golden coverings weren't placed where mourners could admire them. They were hidden beneath layers of textiles, pressed directly against the desiccated skin of the departed. This was no display of wealth, it was spiritual first aid, a last-ditch effort to recharge the ruler's soul with solar energy before its journey into the afterlife. The Inca took this symbolism further than any other civilization. While Egyptians used gold as divine flesh and Mesopotamians saw it as celestial tears, the Andean people believed gold was literally congealed sunlight. Their legends told of a time when the sun wept golden tears during a great catastrophe, and these tears hardened into the veins of metal running through the mountains. When miners extracted gold, they weren't just digging up ore, they were harvesting droplets of sacred light frozen in earthly form. This explains why the mummy of the great ruler Pachacuti was found wrapped in a gold-embroidered tunic so reflective that priests claimed it could blind those who looked directly at it during ceremonies. The garment wasn't meant for human eyes, it was a beacon designed to catch Inti's gaze from across the celestial plains. But gold wasn't the only yellow guarding Incan royalty. Their tombs blazed with vibrant mineral pigments, ochres from the sacred Urubamba River, sulfurous yellows from volcanic deposits near Arequipa. Archaeologists analyzing the tomb of Huayna Capac discovered something remarkable. The walls were painted with alternating bands of gold leaf and yellow ochre, creating a visual pulse that seemed to throb in torchlight. This wasn't arbitrary decoration, it was careful neuroscience. The Inca understood that rhythmic patterns in sacred colors could induce trance states in mourners, helping them commune with the departed. Even the mummy bundles themselves followed this logic, with layers of yellow-dyed alpaca wool wrapped in precise Fibonacci spirals, a visual representation of the sun's path through the sky. What's truly groundbreaking is how the Inca expanded yellow's protective role beyond death. Before entombment, royal mummies were paraded through Cusco during the Inti Raymi festival, their golden masks catching the June solstice light. This wasn't just pageantry, it was cosmic realignment. The Inca believed that by exposing the mummies to the year's strongest sunlight, they could recharge their protective energies like solar batteries. Contemporary accounts describe how these mummies were treated as living entities seated at banquets, consulted for advice, even fed golden maize beer through straws inserted into their mouths. The message was clear. Wrapped in yellow's embrace, death became just another form of photosynthesis, a temporary shadow before the soul bloomed again in the sun's eternal garden. The most touching evidence comes not from grand imperial tombs, but from the graves of children sacrificed during Capacocha rituals. These young messengers to the gods were buried with simple yellow flowers, not the flashy marigolds we might expect, but tiny golden blooms called cantu, that only grew above 4,000 meters. Modern botanists have identified these as a rare high-altitude asteraceae, their pigment unusually resistant to fading. 500 years later, some excavators report finding these flowers still retaining a faint golden hue, nature's own stubborn echo of the sun's promise. In that persistence, we see the true depth of the Inca's belief. That yellow wasn't just a color, but a covenant written in light, sworn between the living, the dead, and the undying sky. The cerulean blues of Minoan burial chambers didn't just mimic the sea, they captured its soul. Step into one of these ancient tombs on Crete, and you'd find yourself submerged in shades of turquoise and teal, the walls alive with darting fish and curling waves, as if the ocean itself had flooded the chamber to claim its noble occupant. For the Minoans, these weren't mere decorations, they were passports. Every brushstroke of blue was a prayer to the deities who ruled the waters, a plea for safe passage to the afterlife across the very same seas that had sustained their civilization. What made the Minoans' relationship with blue so unique? Unlike the Egyptians, who imported lapis lazuli at great cost, or the Mesopotamians, who reserved blue for divine depictions, the Minoans drew their sacred hues from their backyard, the Aegean. Their artisans mastered the art of creating vibrant blues from locally sourced azurite and crushed sea snails, yielding pigments that shifted from deep cobalt to luminous aquamarine depending on the light. The famous dolphin fresco from the burial complex at Knossos shows this mastery in action, the creatures' arched bodies gliding through cerulean waves, their forms outlined in a blue so lifelike it seems to pulse with the tide's rhythm. This wasn't just artistry, it was alchemy, transforming powdered minerals into liquid seascapes that would guide the dead home. But the aquatic motifs served a deeper purpose. Marine life symbolized resurrection in Minoan culture, the way octopuses regenerated limbs, the way shellfish emerged reborn from their molted shells. When nobles were buried surrounded by frescoes of nautilus shells spiraling into infinity or dolphins leaping toward the horizon, it wasn't poetic metaphor. It was a direct invocation of nature's promise that what appears to end often merely changes form. The tomb of a Minoan priestess in Phaistos drives this point home. Her sarcophagus is painted with a school of fish swimming in an endless circle, their bodies forming a loop as perfect as the cycle of seasons. The materials themselves reveal how sacred this connection was. Analysis of blue pigments in the Zakros royal tomb showed traces of salt mixed into the paint, not from carelessness but intention. The artisans had deliberately blended seawater into their pigments, infusing each stroke with the literal essence of the Mediterranean. Even the tomb's architecture echoed this bond. Many were carved with channels that allowed groundwater to seep into the chambers, so the dead would rest eternally cradled by the earth's hidden tides. Perhaps most telling is how Minoan blue transcended class. While other cultures reserved their costliest colors for elites, even common Minoan graves contained sea-worn pebbles dyed blue or crude fish figurines painted with azurite. This egalitarian approach to the afterlife reflects a civilization that saw the sea not as a barrier but as the great equalizer, a realm where every soul, noble or fisherman, would eventually sail into the same eternal horizon. When modern divers retrieve fragments of these frescoes from collapsed tombs, the blues still vibrate with life, as if the Aegean's heart still beats within them. And in a way it does, because for the Minoans, blue wasn't just a color, it was the water that carried them into forever. The fiery oranges of Persian royal tombs weren't just bold, they were alchemical. When artisans mixed red ochre and yellow orpiment to create this blazing hue, they weren't merely blending pigments. They were fusing the essence of earth and sun into a single sacred flame. Walk through the ruins of Persepolis' necropolis, and you'll find chambers where every surface still glows with these sunset tones, as if the walls themselves were bathed in perpetual dusk. For the Achaemenid kings, orange wasn't just decorative, it was dynastic alchemy, transforming mortal rulers into eternal sovereigns through the very chemistry of color. This obsession with orange stemmed from Zoroastrianism's central tenet, fire as divine intermediary. The eternal flames in temples weren't just symbols, they were living manifestations of Ahura Mazda's wisdom. By saturating tombs in orange, Persian artisans recreated that holy fire in mineral form. The tomb of Cyrus the Great at Pasargadae reveals this ritual in stunning detail. Its limestone blocks were originally washed with orange iron oxide, so the entire structure would appear to smolder in daylight. But here's the genius: the pigment wasn't applied uniformly. Strategic patches of deeper vermilion created the illusion of flickering flames when torchlight moved through the chamber, a visual trick that made mourners feel they stood inside an eternal fire temple. What's fascinating is how orange bridged two worlds in Persian cosmology. Red symbolized earthly power, the bloodline of kings. Yellow represented divine radiance, the favor of the gods. Orange, as their fusion, became the chromatic handshake between throne and altar. When Darius I was entombed, his sarcophagus wasn't gilded like Egyptian pharaohs. It was layered with alternating bands of red and yellow glaze that optically merged into orange when viewed from the chamber's entrance. This wasn't just artistry, it was theology in 3 dimensions, asserting that true kingship existed precisely where mortal and divine met. The materials themselves tell a story of devotion. Persian orange wasn't easy to produce. It required regal, an arsenic sulfide mineral that released toxic fumes when ground. Artisans working on royal tombs reportedly suffered hallucinations from prolonged exposure, which only heightened the pigment's mystical reputation. Some wall inscriptions even refer to the color as dazzling madness, suggesting its vibrant tones were thought to induce visionary states in those mourning nearby. The famous Ochre's treasure contains a ceremonial shield coated in this dangerous orange, not for battle, but to spiritually burn away impurities from the soul as it crossed into the afterlife. Perhaps most revealing is how orange's meaning shifted after conquests. When Alexander burned Persepolis, survivors reportedly salvaged orange pigment from the ruins to mix into their own burial shrouds. A quiet act of resistance that transformed the color from imperial statement to cultural survival. Centuries later, Sasanian rulers revived the tradition, painting their tomb ceilings with orange zodiacs that mirrored the sacred fire altars below. Even today, Zoroastrian towers of silence in Yazd retain traces of this legacy, their concentric circles stained orange not by paint, but by centuries of sunset rituals honoring the same fiery duality that once guided kings into eternity. The turquoise beads adorning a fallen Navajo chief weren't just ornaments, they were tiny pieces of the sky, hardened into stone and sewn into his burial garments like celestial armor. Across the American Southwest, indigenous cultures revered this serene blue-green hue not for its beauty alone, but for its power to straddle worlds. When a Pueblo leader was laid to rest with turquoise pendants placed over his heart, the stones weren't merely grave goods, they were spiritual conductors, vibrating with the energy of rain-laden clouds and the first green shoots of spring. For tribes from the ancestral Pueblones to the Zuni, turquoise was the color where earth and heaven touched, making it the perfect medium to carry souls across that sacred threshold. What set turquoise apart from other sacred minerals was its origin story. Unlike gold hidden in veins or lapis hauled from distant mountains, turquoise formed where water met stone, a literal marriage of elements that mirrored the Native American concept of balance. The Apache believed certain turquoise deposits were crystallized tears of the Creator, spilled during moments of profound joy or sorrow. This explains why warriors like Geronimo carried turquoise amulets into battle, and why medicine men pressed turquoise dust into ceremonial face paint. The color didn't just represent protection, it was protection, its very molecules forged from divine emotion. When these stones accompanied leaders into the afterlife, they became passports stamped with cosmic approval. The burial practices surrounding turquoise reveal even deeper layers of meaning. At Choco Canyon, archaeologists uncovered a high-status burial where the deceased wore a sash embroidered with over 10,000 turquoise beads, each one drilled with stone tools over days of painstaking labor. This wasn't about displaying wealth. The beads formed intricate cloud patterns across the fabric, a wearable prayer for the soul to ascend like mist. Similarly, in Mesa Verde's cliff dwellings, chiefs were often buried with unworked turquoise nodules clutched in their hands, raw potential waiting to be shaped in the next world. The Hopi still practice this tradition today, placing rough turquoise chunks in graves as seed stones, spiritual kernels that would blossom into new forms beyond the veil. Turquoise's protective role extended beyond individual burials to entire communities. The Aztec, who traded for Southwest turquoise along vast networks, lined their emperors' tombs with mosaics of the stone, believing its color could repel malevolent spirits like lightning rods divert storms. Modern analysis of these mosaics reveals something extraordinary. Artisans deliberately used stones with varying hues, from sky blue to deep teal, creating gradients that mimicked the shifting colors of the Rio Grande throughout the day. This wasn't decoration, it was a sacred river in miniature, its currents ready to carry the soul westward to the land of the ancestors. Perhaps the most poignant testament to turquoise's power comes from an unexpected source: the ledger drawings of imprisoned Cheyenne warriors in the late 19th century. Amidst scenes of battle and horses, many artists depicted their fallen comrades with brilliant turquoise auras, a color they achieved by grinding ink sticks with salvaged turquoise beads. These weren't symbolic representations. The warriors truly believed the pigment retained the stone's spiritual properties. Today, when museum conservators examine ancient turquoise beads from burial sites, they often find them warm to the touch long after excavation, as if still pulsing with the life force they were meant to channel. That's the magic of this sacred color. It doesn't just bridge worlds, it makes the distance between them feel as thin as morning mist over canyon walls. The rough-hewn oak of a Viking longship wasn't just wood, It was the color of endings and beginnings, stained dark by salt and time. When a Norse chieftain was laid to rest inside that weathered brown hull, the message was clear. He wasn't leaving the earth, but returning to it in the most sacred way possible. Unlike the gleaming golds of emperors or the celestial blues of pharaohs, Viking burials embraced the muted tones of soil and bark, finding power in what other cultures might have dismissed as ordinary. That rich, earthy brown wasn't just practical, it was poetry. The color of the forests that built their ships, the bogs that preserved their dead, and the fertile soil that would one day reclaim them. Consider the Oseberg ship burial, where two women of high status were interred in a vessel every shade of brown. From the honey-colored oak planks to the walnut-brown carvings of serpents coiling along the prow. These weren't random choices. Norse mythology spoke of Yggdrasil, the great world tree whose roots reached into the underworld and whose trunk sustained the realms of gods and men. By surrounding their dead with brown wood, the Vikings were recreating that cosmic axis, turning each burial ship into a vessel that could sail down Yggdrasil's routes to Helheim, the realm of the honorable dead. Even the bodies were prepared with brown reverence, wrapped in wool dyed with walnut husks or ochre, so the deceased would carry the earth's hues into the afterlife like a protective cloak. But brown's significance went deeper than mythology. Practicality and spirituality intertwined in Viking culture like the grain of their prized oak. A chieftain buried in a ship wasn't just being honored, he was being equipped. The brown sails, though folded in death, were stained with pine tar to withstand imaginary storms in the next world. The wooden shields lining the grave, their surfaces darkened by linseed oil, weren't decorations, they were functional armor meant to weather spiritual battles ahead. Even the iron rivets holding the ship together were left to rust deliberately, their reddish-brown streaks symbolizing the blood that would sustain the dead on their journey. The most profound use of brown wasn't in grand ship burials, but in the humblest of graves. Common Vikings were often laid to rest with simple birch bark pouches filled with brown soil from their homesteads, a tactile connection to the land they'd cultivated in life. Archaeologists have found these pouches carefully placed over hearts or clenched in skeletal hands, the earth inside sometimes mixed with barley grains or crushed juniper berries. This wasn't sentimentality, it was symbiosis. The Norse believed that just as crops sprang from brown soil, so too would their souls eventually re-emerge, nourished by the same earth that cradled their remains. Perhaps the most haunting evidence of brown's sacred role comes from the bog bodies of Scandinavia. These naturally mummified corpses, preserved by tannin-rich waters, often wear brown wool mantles so well preserved you can still see the weave patterns. The Lindo man, for instance, was found with his brown hair matted with bog butter, a deliberate offering that turned his whole body the color of the peat that embraced him. For the Vikings, these bogs weren't just graves, they were cauldrons of transformation, where the alchemy of earth and water turned flesh into something timeless, as durable as the brown oak of their sacred ships. What modern eyes might see as drab or utilitarian, the Norse saw as a spectrum of sacred browns, each shade a different note in the song of the earth. The umber of a ship's hull after decades at sea, the russet of iron oxide staining a burial stone, the golden brown of mead pooled in a grave-bound drinking horn. These colors didn't just accompany the dead, they spoke for them, whispering of roots and return, of voyages ended and new beginnings waiting beneath the soil. When we brush the dirt from a Viking artifact today, we're not just uncovering history, we're reclaiming a language where brown wasn't the absence of color, but the voice of the earth itself. The gleam of silver in an Aztec noble's tomb wasn't just wealth on display, it was moonlight captured in metal, a sacred pact with the celestial rhythms that governed life and death. While gold blazed with the sun's masculine energy, silver whispered of the moon's cool embrace, its luminous sheen representing the feminine forces that balanced the cosmos. When a high-ranking Aztec was laid to rest with silver rings adorning their fingers or discs placed over their eyes, they weren't being adorned, they were being armored. These weren't trinkets but talismans, designed to harness the moon's power to guide them through the 9-level underworld of Mictlan. What made silver so potent in Aztec belief? It all traced back to Coyolxauhqui, the moon goddess whose dismembered body, according to myth, scattered silver across the night sky. Her story wasn't just a tale of sibling rivalry with the sun god Huitzilopochtli. It was a parable about duality, about how destruction and renewal were two sides of the same sacred coin. Silver embodied this paradox. It was soft enough to mold with bare hands, yet durable enough to outlast generations. It reflected light but dwelled in shadow. This duality made it the perfect medium for nobles navigating the afterlife's liminal spaces. The famous burial of a Texcoco king uncovered near Lake Texcoco revealed this principle in action, his sarcophagus lined with alternating sheets of silver and obsidian, creating a checkerboard of light and dark that mirrored the moon's eternal dance with the void. The craftsmanship behind these silver grave goods reveals even deeper layers of meaning. Aztec metalsmiths didn't just polish silver, they textured it deliberately, hammering surfaces to catch light at different angles. A funerary mask might have one cheek smooth as still water, the other roughened like cratered moon terrain. This wasn't aesthetic whimsy, it was spiritual cartography. The varying surfaces acted as topographic maps of the afterlife's terrain, helping the deceased recognize landmarks in the spirit world. Modern conservators working on Montezuma, the first granddaughter's tomb, discovered something extraordinary: microscopic grooves cut into silver nose ornaments that, when filled with sacred Ochre liquor, would refract torchlight into crescent patterns on the tomb walls. These weren't decorations, they were lunar projectors, casting protective sigils in real time. But silver's role extended beyond individual protection. In grand ceremonial burials, nobles were often interred with silver bells tied around their ankles, a practice that might seem decorative until you understand the symbolism. Each bell's pitch was carefully tuned to match one of the 13 lunar months in the Aztec calendar. As mourners processed past the tomb, their footsteps would set off a ghostly celestial chorus, an auditory reminder that even in death, the noble maintained the moon's sacred mathematics. The recently excavated tomb of a Tlacopan queen took this further. Her burial shroud was embroidered with hundreds of silver beads arranged in perfect concentric circles, forming a wearable version of the Aztec moonstone calendar. Perhaps most poignant is how silver connected the living and the dead. During the festival of Mictlantecuhtli, families would bring silver dust to grave sites, sprinkling it in patterns that mirrored the night sky's constellations. This wasn't mere remembrance, it was cosmic maintenance, a way to recharge the silver amulets buried below with fresh lunar energy. Modern archaeologists sometimes find these silver traces still clinging to ancient skulls, their molecules having bonded with bone over centuries, proof that for the Aztecs, silver wasn't just a metal, but a living bridge between worlds. When you see these artifacts in museums today, their surfaces tarnished by time, try to picture them fresh. Each one a tiny moon, pulsing with the promise that even in darkness, there's always light waiting to be reflected. The crimson silks wrapping an Indian Maharaja's body weren't just funeral finery, they were a declaration written in dye, a bold statement that death couldn't dim his sovereignty. In the grand tombs of Rajasthan and the hidden crypts of Tamil Nadu, red wasn't merely a color, it was dynastic DNA pulsing with the same vitality that once coursed through royal veins. When a ruler like Chhatrapati Shivaji was laid to rest with vermilion-streaked brows and hands stained with henna, it wasn't pageantry, it was alchemy. These vibrant hues transformed the body into a living emblem, ensuring the king's authority would outlast his final breath. What made red so indispensable to Indian royal burials? The answer lies in the sacred intersection of blood and divinity. Hindu tradition held that kings were partial incarnations of Agni, the fire god, whose flames burned ruby red. By shrouding rulers in scarlet silks or painting their tombs with red ochre, mourners weren't just honoring the dead, they were stoking that divine spark. The tomb of Raja Chola in Thanjavur reveals this belief in stunning detail. Its inner sanctum walls were originally washed with a mortar mixed with powdered lac insects, creating a red so deep it seemed to glow from within. Modern spectrographic analysis shows the pigment contained traces of gold leaf, making the surfaces shimmer like embers when illuminated by oil lamps, a deliberate illusion of eternal fire. But red's duality is what made it truly powerful. In Indian culture, the same vermilion that adorned brides' hair parts also marked warriors' foreheads and funeral biers. This wasn't a contradiction, it was cosmic balance. The Mughal Emperor Akbar's tomb in Sikandra demonstrates this perfectly. While the exterior dazzles with white marble, the burial chamber floor is inlaid with red sandstone patterns resembling flowing blood, a visual metaphor for the life force that persists beneath death's pale veneer. Even the lotus motifs carved into the walls alternate between red and white, each bloom a reminder that creation and destruction were two petals on the same eternal flower. The materials themselves tell a story of devotion. Indian reds weren't just pigments, they were potions. The famed Lal Chandan paste applied to royal mummies combined saffron, red sandalwood, and mercury sulfide, believed to magnetize the soul toward rebirth. Rajput kings were often buried with their swords sheathed in red-dyed velvet, not as weapons, but as spiritual lightning rods to attract righteous energy in the afterlife. And in the Deccan Plateau, archaeologists have uncovered nobles interred with bundles of red turmeric roots clutched to their chests, nature's own preservatives, meant to slow not bodily decay, but the fading of the soul's vibrancy. Perhaps the most poignant testament to red's power comes from a lesser-known practice in Kerala's royal tombs. Here, rulers were buried with their feet dipped in red lacquer, creating permanent padukas, symbolic sandals for their journey. The left foot would be stained with organic dyes that darkened over time, while the right retained its bright vermilion, an eternal representation of the king's dual role as both mortal ruler and divine representative. Today, when you see these faint red footprints on stone slabs in forgotten mausoleums, you're not looking at decoration. You're witnessing the indelible mark of a belief system where color didn't just accompany power, it was power distilled into its most concentrated form. The unbleached white silk shrouding a Japanese emperor's body wasn't just fabric, it was a cloud woven by human hands, a vessel light enough to carry the soul skyward. In the hushed stillness of the Kyoto Imperial tombs, where centuries of rulers rest beneath mounds of raked gravel, this luminous white wasn't chosen for simplicity. It was the visual equivalent of a sacred chant, its purity echoing the untainted state all souls aspired to achieve. When Emperor Kamu was laid to rest in the 9th century, his white burial robes weren't merely traditional. They were transformational, designed to dissolve the boundary between mortal flesh and the divine nothingness of the cosmos. In Shinto belief, white or shiro wasn't the absence of color, but the presence of all possibilities. The gods themselves were said to wear white when descending to earth, their garments shimmering like morning mist over rice fields. This explains why imperial burial mounds like those in Osaka's Mazu Furuichi complex were once covered in white quartz sand, each grain representing a star in the celestial canopy. Archaeologists have found traces of this practice in the tomb of Emperor Nintoku, where the mound's surface was layered with crushed seashells, nature's own ivory tiles, reflecting moonlight to guide the emperor's spirit home. The shells weren't just decorative, their calcium-rich surfaces were believed to absorb impurities, acting as spiritual filters for the journey ahead. Buddhism deepened white's significance, associating it with the lotus flower that blooms unsoiled from muddy waters. When Emperor Shamu's consort, Empress Kamyo, was buried in the 8th century, her white silk undergarments were stitched with barely visible lotus motifs, not for the living to admire, but as a map for her soul to follow toward enlightenment. Modern imaging technology has revealed even more subtle details. The threads were coated in a thin layer of saltpeter, making them faintly luminescent in darkness. This wasn't superstition, it was advanced spiritual engineering, creating a wearable path of light through the afterlife's shadows. The materials themselves reveal white's sacred alchemy. Imperial shrouds weren't dyed white, they were woven from the rarest naturally white silk, produced by silkworms fed exclusively on mulberry leaves from shrine gardens. A single robe might require cocoons from 15,000 worms, their fibers left unbleached to retain what artisans called the breath of heaven in the threads. The burial gown of Emperor Go-Daigo took this further. Its sleeves contained hollow tubes of white jade, which priests would fill with spring water during entombment rituals. As the water evaporated over centuries, it would theoretically carry the emperor's essence upward like morning dew returning to the clouds. Perhaps the most profound expression of white's power lies in what's missing. Unlike Egyptian tombs bursting with colorful artifacts or Mayan crypts drenched in red, Japanese imperial burials often contain startlingly few objects, just a mirror, a sword, and the white-robed body. This minimalism wasn't poverty of expression, but its zenith. In the tomb of Emperor Kanmu, archaeologists found a single white pebble placed where the ruler's heart would have been, not a gemstone, but an ordinary river rock scrubbed clean. It encapsulated the Shinto ideal that true purity wasn't about splendor, but about returning to essence, like a drop of rain merging back into the ocean, colorless yet containing all colors within its transparency. Today, when you see the stark white banners fluttering at imperial funerals or the unadorned wooden coffins carried through Tokyo's streets, you're witnessing more than tradition. You're seeing the living echo of a belief system that saw death not as an end, but as the soul's final refinement, a process where all hues fade to white, not from emptiness, but from having absorbed every experience, every emotion, until nothing remains but light itself. The deep emerald greens adorning an Ashanti king's burial chamber weren't just ornamental, they were living tendrils of the rainforest itself, woven into the very fabric of eternity. Across ancient Africa, from the Mali Empire's golden age to the kingdom of Benin's zenith, green symbolized something far greater than wealth. It pulsed with the life force of the land. When a Yoruba ruler was laid to rest with strings of malachite beads circling his wrists, or a Congo noble buried with copper patina bracelets slowly oxidizing to verdigris, these weren't mere grave goods. They were agricultural alchemy, transforming tombs into spiritual seedbeds where kingship could take root and flourish beyond death. West Africa's burial traditions reveal green's dual role most vividly. Malian emperors like Mansa Musa were interred with woven grass mats dyed with indigo and overlaid with fresh leaves, not as temporary decorations, but as permanent conduits. The famous burial caves of the Dogon people take this further, their walls smeared with green clay mixed with millet chaff, creating a literal mortar of fertility. But the most striking example comes from Ife, where archaeologists uncovered a royal tomb filled with hundreds of tiny green glass beads imported from as far as India. At first glance, this seems like extravagant trade until you learn each bead was placed in the soil like a seed, arranged in spiraling patterns mimicking the growth rings of sacred baobab trees. Central Africa's kingdoms interpreted green through an even more mystical lens. The Kuba people buried their kings with raffia cloth dipped in crushed euphorbia leaves, creating a poisonous green sheen that glowed faintly in torchlight. This wasn't about preservation, it was spiritual deterrence, the equivalent of planting thorns around a sacred grove. Similarly, Luba royal tombs often contained green-stained oracle bones, their celadon hue achieved through weeks of burial in copper-rich soils. When extracted, these bones weren't just divination tools. They were considered literal branches of the underworld's cosmic tree, their green patina proof they'd tapped into subterranean life forces. What makes African green burial practices unique is their living continuity. While other civilizations' color symbolism faded, many African traditions persist. The Bamum people of Cameroon still wrap their dead in green plantain leaves, believing the decomposition process transfers chlorophyll's vitality directly into the soul. In Ethiopia's highlands, priests maintain the ancient practice of burying nobles with emerald green tough stones, volcanic rocks that absorb water and slowly release it, mirroring the deceased's transition from solid form to spiritual essence. Even the materials tell a story of adaptation where Egyptian blues required imported lapis and Mayan reds demanded dangerous cinnabar. African greens often came from humble sources, crushed ferns, river clay, or even certain termite mound soils prized for their mineral content. Perhaps the most profound testament to green's power comes from Great Zimbabwe's ruins. There, in a hidden chamber beneath the king's platform, archaeologists found a single green soapstone bird, its wings outstretched over a buried grain silo. At first, the connection seems obscure until you learn that Zimbabwean rulers were considered rainmakers, their mortal bodies mere vessels for the land's fertility. The green bird wasn't just a symbol, it was a battery, storing the life force of countless harvests to nourish the king's spirit as he became one with the cycles he once governed. Today, when wind stirs the grasses over these ancient tombs, it's easy to imagine the color itself is alive, whispering that in African cosmology, death was never an end, but a different kind of germination. The molten glow of Thai royal gold wasn't just luxury, it was liquid sunlight forged into sacred geometry, each curve and contour designed to trap divinity. When a Siamese king like Ramkhamhaeng was laid to rest in the 15th century, his tomb didn't just contain gold artifacts, it became a golden universe in miniature, with gilded stupas mimicking Mount Meru's sacred peaks and miniature golden boats ready to sail the afterlife's celestial rivers. This wasn't opulence for its own sake. In the Theravada Buddhism, gold embodied the Dhamma itself, the teachings of enlightenment made physically manifest. A monarch's burial gold wasn't a display of wealth, but a visual sermon, radiating the Buddha's wisdom long after the king's last breath. What set Thai gold apart was its alchemical purity. While European crowns mixed gold with silver for durability, Thai artisans insisted on unalloyed tong dum, black gold, a term for pure 24-karat metal so soft it could be molded like clay. The famous burial mask of King Nersuan, discovered in Ayutthaya's ruins, demonstrates this devotion, its surface intentionally left unpolished to catch candlelight in 1,000 microscopic facets, creating the illusion of living radiance. But here's the genius. The mask's interior was lined with crushed lotus pollen mixed with gold leaf, so the king's decomposing face would literally merge with sacred materials. This wasn't embalming, it was metamorphosis, turning mortality into gilded enlightenment. The craftsmanship reveals even deeper symbolism. Thai funerary gold wasn't cast, it was repoussé, hammered from the back, a technique requiring weeks of meticulous tapping. The burial urn of King Taksin shows why this mattered, its surface hammered with thousands of tiny dharma wheels, each one visible only when light struck at precise angles. Mourners circling the urn would see flashes of sacred geometry appearing and vanishing, a visual metaphor for the transient nature of earthly life versus the permanence of spiritual truth. Modern laser scans reveal these wheels were spaced according to astrological calculations, their patterns mirroring constellations on the king's death date, a celestial map in gold. Gold's role extended beyond the body to the tomb's very architecture. At Wat Ratchaburana in Ayutthaya, archaeologists uncovered a hidden crypt where the walls weren't just gilded. They were layered with gold-leafed palm leaf manuscripts, their sacred texts facing inward toward the enshrined ashes. This created a literal circle of wisdom, with the king's remains at the center of a golden mandala of knowledge. Even the mortar between bricks contained powdered gold mixed with sandalwood paste, so the entire structure would subtly shimmer during certain lunar phases. Perhaps the most profound expression of gold's sacred role comes from an unexpected source: the humble burial coins of commoners. While nobles had golden funeral masks, even peasant families scraped together tiny gold amulets called faryant, engraved with protective verses and placed in the deceased's mouth. These weren't currency for the afterlife, they were spiritual microchips, believed to vibrate with mantras that would guide the soul past demons. Modern metallurgists have found these amulets contain trace amounts of mercury, not as an impurity, but a deliberate addition to make the gold slightly fluid at body temperature, ensuring it would mold perfectly to the dead's teeth like a divine seal. When you stand before these golden relics today, whether the soaring chedis of Bangkok's Grand Palace or the simple funerary tablets in rural temples, you're not just seeing metal. You're witnessing a civilization's unwavering conviction that light could be captured, shaped, and made eternal. For the Thai people, gold wasn't just a color, it was the visual echo of enlightenment itself, a promise that even in death's shadow, the mind could shine brighter than the noonday sun. The Inkai black stones cradled in a Norse seer's skeletal hands weren't just grave offerings, they were fragments of the void itself, cold and heavy with secrets. While Viking warriors might be sent to Valhalla with gleaming swords, those who spoke with the gods were buried differently. Their tombs brimmed with darkness, jet beads strung like condensed night, charred rune sticks blackened by ritual fires, even raven feathers placed carefully over sightless eyes. This wasn't mere symbolism. For the Norse, black was the color of the unseen currents that shaped fate, the shade that clung to Odin's cloak when he wandered the worlds as a stranger. A seer buried in black wasn't being mourned, they were being equipped for the endless journey between realms. What made black so sacred to Norse spiritual leaders? It all traced back to the Well of Erd, that cosmic spring where the Norns wove destiny from dark water. Viking seers didn't just predict the future, they dipped their consciousness into that primordial blackness, bringing back visions like water drawn from a well. The famous burial of Avolva, a female seer, in Firkat, Denmark, reveals this connection in stunning detail. Her body was surrounded by a perfect circle of black tourmaline stones, each one positioned to mirror a star in the night sky. But here's what's extraordinary: scientific analysis shows these stones were heated before burial, their surfaces deliberately cracked to create fissures that caught torchlight like miniature galaxies. This wasn't decoration, it was a microcosm of the cosmos, a portable well of wisdom for the seer's eternal travels. Black's power extended beyond stones to the very rituals surrounding these burials. Unlike typical Viking cremations where fires burned bright, seers were often burned with damp wood that smoldered for days, producing thick black smoke believed to carry their sight into the spirit world. Their remains were then mixed with charcoal and ground into a black paste used to stain new rune sticks, a literal transfer of knowledge from one generation to the next. At Oseberg, archaeologists found a ceremonial staff carved from ebony, its surface etched with runes filled with a mixture of crushed obsidian and sacrificial blood. When held at a certain angle, the inscriptions disappeared entirely, becoming visible only when light struck the grooves just right, a physical metaphor for how wisdom hides in darkness until the right moment of revelation. The duality of black in Norse belief is what makes it so fascinating. While Christian cultures often associated darkness with evil, the Vikings saw it as the fertile ground where all knowledge grew. Their shamans wore black dyed wool not to intimidate, but because the dye came from iron-rich bog water, the same substance that preserved bodies for centuries in peat marshes. They understood black as the color of preservation, of secrets kept safe until their time came to surface. Modern excavations at Kopang revealed a seer's grave containing dozens of blackened animal bones carved with microscopic runes. Under ultraviolet light, these inscriptions glow with remnants of a phosphorescent lichen paste, proof these Nordic oracles literally made wisdom visible in the dark. Perhaps the most poignant testament to Black's sacred role comes from an unexpected source: children's graves. Young girls believed to have the second sight were sometimes buried with black thread woven through their hair, each strand tied with 9 knots in imitation of Odin's self-sacrifice on Yggdrasil. These weren't mourning customs, they were apprenticeships preparing souls who died too young to serve as guides in the afterlife. Today, when museum visitors peer into these displays, the blackened artifacts seem unremarkable at first glance. But stand there long enough, and you might feel it, the quiet hum of something ancient, the sense that these objects aren't dead but dormant, still holding the shape of mysteries waiting to be unraveled. The deep red ochre caked onto an Aboriginal elder's resting place wasn't just pigment. It was the Earth's own lifeblood, dried and sanctified. Across the vast expanse of Australia, from the Kimberley's sun-baked cliffs to Arnhem Land's sacred waterholes, this crimson dust served as more than decoration. When a revered elder was laid to rest, their body carefully coated in ochre or placed atop a bed of red sand, the color wasn't merely symbolic, it was a living conduit. This vibrant hue pulsed with the same energy that coursed through the ancestral dreaming tracks, those invisible pathways crisscrossing the land where creator spirits still walk. What made red ochre so central to these rituals? The answer lies in its origin. Unlike the mined minerals of other cultures, Aboriginal ochre came from sacred sites where the earth itself seemed to bleed, cliffs streaked with iron-rich deposits, caves where rainwater pooled into ruddy puddles. The Yolngu people of northern Australia believed these deposits formed when ancestral beings shed blood during the dream time, literally embedding their essence into the landscape. Collecting ochre wasn't a mundane task. It required ceremonies, songs passed down through generations to ensure the earth willingly gave up its treasure. The Pitjantjatjara elders still tell of a time when ochre pits were living beings, their hues shifting in response to the singer's respect. The application of ochre in burials revealed even deeper layers of meaning. In the Kimberley region, elders were often buried with packets of powdered ochre mixed with crushed pearl shell, not just for its luster, but because the shell's iridescence mirrored the rainbow serpent scales, the great creator of waterways. Modern archaeologists working in the Nullarbor Plain uncovered a burial where the ochre had been mixed with emu oil, creating a paste that seeped into the bones over centuries. This wasn't accidental. Emu fat was considered a carrier of spiritual energy, a way to cook the ochre's power into the deceased's essence. Similarly, Tiwi Island burial poles, carved with ancestral figures, were traditionally repainted with ochre during monsoon season, the rains washing the pigment downward like blood returning to the earth's veins. Red's role extended beyond individual burials to connect entire communities. During mourning ceremonies in Central Australia, participants still paint their chests with handprints dipped in ochre, not just as grief's expression, but as a tactile bond. Each print leaves behind tiny skin cells mixed with the pigment, literally fusing the living with the ancestral dust beneath their feet. In some traditions, mourners place ochre-coated stones in trees, allowing the wind to scatter the powder gradually, a slow release of sorrow back to the land that birthed it. The Walpiri people take this further, mixing ochre with the hair of the deceased to create kuruwari, sacred designs that map both the physical landscape and the unseen spiritual one. Perhaps the most profound testament to red ochre's power comes from its persistence. At Lake Mungo, archaeologists found the world's oldest known ochre burial, a man covered in crimson powder over 40,000 years ago, his body curled as if returning to the womb of the rust-colored earth. That same ochre still stains the soil today, outlasting bones, tools, even language itself. When contemporary Aboriginal artists use ochre in their work, they're not just painting, they're reactivating an unbroken thread stretching back to those first moments when humans understood color could be more than sight. It could be memory, it could be breath, it could be the very pulse of the land, still beating long after individual lives fade into the red dust from which they came. The cerulean blues adorning a Babylonian king's tomb weren't just decorative, they were fragments of the night sky itself, painstakingly lowered into the earth. In the heart of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates carved their paths through sun-baked plains, blue was more than a hue, it was a cosmic contract. When a ruler like Hammurabi was laid to rest, his body wasn't merely draped in lapis lazuli, it was armored in it. Each bead a tiny piece of the heavens sewn into place to prove his soul belonged among the gods. This wasn't vanity, it was celestial diplomacy. The Babylonians saw their world as a mirror of the divine realm, with kings serving as the linchpin between the two. Their tombs became meticulous recreations of the night sky, with lapis lazuli stars embedded in the ceilings and cobalt blue tiles lining the walls to mimic the endless expanse of the firmament. One of the most striking examples comes from the tomb of Nebuchadnezzar II, where archaeologists discovered a life-sized bas-relief of the king painted in ultramarine, standing atop a ziggurat that stretched upward into an inlaid lapis sky. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't just a burial chamber. It was a launchpad for apotheoses, where earthly rulers shed their mortal forms and ascended to their rightful place among the constellations. But why lapis lazuli when other cultures prized gold or crimson? Because in Mesopotamia, blue wasn't just rare, it was sacred. The stone had to travel thousands of miles from the mines of Afghanistan, passing through the hands of traders who risked bandits and avalanches to deliver it to royal workshops. The Epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's oldest written story, gives us a clue to its significance. The gods themselves were said to dwell in a celestial palace adorned with lapis pillars. By burying their kings with this stone, the Babylonians weren't just honoring the dead, they were rebuilding that divine architecture underground, brick by precious blue brick. The craftsmanship behind these blue tributes reveals even deeper layers of meaning. Babylonian artisans developed a technique called cold gold, where thin sheets of gold foil were pressed onto lapis to create the illusion of stars twinkling against the night. In the tomb of Queen Puabi's Mesopotamian predecessor, excavators found a diadem with alternating lapis and gold beads, not just for contrast, but to represent the sacred marriage of heaven blue and earth gold. Even the adhesive used to set these stones was ritualistically significant, a mix of bitumen and crushed lapis dust, ensuring every fragment, no matter how small, carried its full spiritual weight. Perhaps the most profound testament to blue's power comes from an unexpected source, the humble cylinder seal. These palm-sized artifacts, buried with kings and pressed into clay to leave their mark, were often carved from lapis and etched with scenes of the deceased being led by hand into the presence of the gods. What's remarkable is their size, tiny enough to clutch in a fist, yet dense with symbolism. Like pocket-sized passports, they guaranteed safe passage through the celestial gates, their blue hue serving as a visual password recognized by divine gatekeepers. When archaeologists unearth these tombs today, the blues still startle with their intensity, a defiance of time's fading touch. In that persistence, we see the true depth of the Babylonian belief that color wasn't just pigment, but a living bridge between sand and stars, between the temporary and the eternal. A bridge their kings crossed not in fear, but with the absolute certainty that the sky which had watched over their reign would now welcome them home. The rich purple robes shrouding medieval kings weren't just funeral attire, they were wearable theology, dyed in the very essence of divine authority. When Charlemagne was laid to rest in Ochre Cathedral, his body wasn't simply dressed in purple, it was armored in it, the deep amethyst hues acting as a visual proclamation that his power didn't end with death. This color's journey from Mediterranean mollusks to royal crypts is one of the most fascinating tales in the history of symbolism. Unlike gold's solar brilliance or red's vitality, purple's magic lay in its impossible rarity, a hue so difficult to produce that its very existence seemed proof of God's favor upon those who wore it. The secret behind purple's royal status begins with a tiny sea creature. Tyrian purple, the most coveted shade, required thousands of murex snails harvested off the Phoenician coast. Workers would extract a colorless glandular secretion that transformed when exposed to sunlight, first yellow, then green, before settling into that legendary deep violet. The process was so noxious that ancient writers described dye workshops as places one could not stand beside for long without retching. Yet medieval monarchs willingly bankrupted treasuries for bolts of this fabric, not despite its origins, but because of them. The suffering required to create purple mirrored Christ's passion, making it the perfect chromatic bridge between earthly rule and heavenly mandate. Examine the burial effigy of Elena of Aquitaine at Fontevraud Abbey, and you'll see this theology woven into stone. Her sculpted robes cascade in purple marble folds, each chisel mark replicating the drape of actual Tyrian dyed silk long since turned to dust. This wasn't artistic license. Contemporary accounts confirm she was buried in purple garments lined with golden crosses, creating a living map of the celestial hierarchy. The message was unmistakable. Just as gold represented divine light, purple signified the sacred twilight where mortal and immortal met. Even the shade's instability became symbolic. Exposure to light caused purple dyes to fade toward blue, just as kingship's earthly glory would ultimately dissolve into heavenly eternity. By the time of the Renaissance, purple's funerary role had expanded beyond fabric. The tomb of Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Roman II in Palermo Cathedral showcases an extraordinary innovation. His sarcophagus was carved from porphyry, that rare purple stone quarried from a single Egyptian mountain. Artisans polished its surface to a mirror sheen so mourners would see their own reflections swimming in the imperial purple, a visceral reminder that sovereignty outlived any individual monarch. Modern spectrographic analysis reveals even more subtle genius. The stone contains microscopic crystals that refract candlelight into prismatic patterns, creating the illusion that the entire tomb breathes with otherworldly energy. Perhaps purple's most profound transformation occurred in death rituals themselves. When English kings like Edward the Confessor were prepared for burial, embalmers would steep their wrappings not just in purple dye, but in a solution containing crushed amethyst. Medieval lapidaries believed this stone prevented drunkenness, translated funerarily. It symbolized the soul's clarity before divine judgment. The famous Bayeux tapestry depicts Harold Godwinson's death with his body wrapped in purple, despite being an enemy of the Norman crown, proof that even in defeat, purple's sacredness transcended politics. What makes European royal purple truly unique is how its meaning inverted over centuries. Originally a color of pagan luxury under Rome, it was baptized into Christian symbolism by Byzantine emperors, then democratized in death. While living rulers alone could wear purple, saints and martyrs were frequently depicted in purple burial shrouds. This chromatic communion between throne and altar reached its zenith with the 1356 Golden Bull, which decreed all future Holy Roman emperors must be buried in purple. Today, when we see these faded violet vestments in museum cases, we're not just looking at faded fabric, we're witnessing the last echoes of a world where color wasn't just seen, but felt as a physical manifestation of the divine right that shaped continents. The deep terracotta reds staining the burial shrouds of Amazonian chiefs weren't just pigment, they were the earth's own heartbeat, captured in clay and feather. For tribes like the Yanomami and the Kayapo, red wasn't merely a color of war, it was the vital force that animated both the jungle and the warriors who defended it. When a chief was laid to rest, his body wasn't simply painted with red ochre. It was saturated in it, as if the community sought to recharge his spirit with the same iron-rich energy that nourished the towering mahogany trees and the scarlet macaws circling overhead. What made red so sacred in these traditions? The answer lies in the Amazon itself. Unlike the mineral-based pigments of other cultures, South American reds often came from living sources: the crushed carmine beetles that stained ceremonial capes, the vibrantly hued feathers of the sacred ibis, even the reddish resin of the Sangha de Grotto tree, known as dragon's blood for its ability to seal wounds. These weren't arbitrary choices. The Ashaninka people believed these materials carried literal life force. When a chief was buried with his feathered headdress, they weren't just honoring his status, but ensuring his soul could breathe through the quills, drawing vitality from the spirit world like roots drawing nutrients from soil. The preparation of these red burial materials reveals even deeper layers of meaning. Among the Shipibo Kanibo, mourners would mix the chief's body paint with powdered annatto seeds and his own saliva collected during life, creating a pigment that was uniquely his. Modern analysis of burial sites along the Xingu River shows some red designs were applied with tools made from the bones of the deceased's ancestors, turning each stroke into a physical reunion across generations. The Wari people took this further, wrapping their dead in cotton shrouds dyed with rubia root, then burying them with pots of red dye that would slowly seep into the earth, a symbolic transfusion of energy back to the land that sustained them. Red's duality is what made it so powerful. It represented both the blood spilled in battle and the life-giving fertility of the rainforest. The Disana people visualized their universe as a great red serpent, its scales pulsing with the rhythm of creation and destruction. When a Tupinamba chief was interred, his grave goods often included red-stained hunting trophies alongside seedlings wrapped in crimson-dyed fibers, acknowledging that true leadership balanced violence with nurturing. Archaeologists working in the Marajo archipelago uncovered burial urns where the bones themselves were stained red. then arranged to resemble sprouting plants, a direct visual metaphor for the belief that death was merely the soul's replanting. Perhaps the most striking testament to Red's sacred role comes from an unexpected source: the funerary rituals of the Matses, or Jaguar people. Their shamans were buried wearing gloves made from the pelts of red howler monkeys, the palms coated in red clay. The left hand symbolized the setting sun, death's inevitability, while the right represented the rising sun, the promise of rebirth. Even in stillness, these crimson hands seemed to move, catching the forest light as if conducting an eternal symphony between mortality and renewal. Today, when anthropologists carefully unwrap these burial bundles, the reds still glow with an almost unnatural intensity, as if the Amazon itself refuses to let its champions fade quietly into memory. The pristine white linen shrouds of Egyptian priestesses weren't merely fabric, they were woven moonlight, starched sunlight, textiles so pure they blurred the line between mortal and divine. In the sacred necropolises of Thebes and Memphis, these women of the temple were laid to rest in garments so blindingly white, contemporary accounts describe them as seeming to glow in the dim tomb light. This was no accident. Where pharaohs wrapped themselves in gold to proclaim divinity, priestesses chose white to become invisible, not as absence but as transcendence. Their burial linens, often weighing twice as much as their living vestments, were layered like the petals of a lotus, each fold a step closer to enlightenment. Each thread spun from flax grown exclusively in temple gardens where the soil was blessed by rituals older than the pyramids themselves. What made white so sacred to these women? The answer lies in the duality of Egyptian cosmology. While black represented fertile soil and rebirth, white symbolized the untainted horizon where earth met sky, the liminal space priestesses navigated daily in their rituals. The famed burial of the god's wife of Ammon, Karamama, reveals this beautifully. Her mummy was wrapped in 16 layers of white linen, each inscribed with hymns in invisible ink made from crushed calcite texts that only appeared when the fabric was held at specific angles to torchlight. This wasn't secrecy, it was sacred theater, a performance meant for the god's eyes alone. Modern multispectral imaging has revealed even more astonishing details. Some priestesses' shrouds were embroidered with microscopic white on white thread patterns, replicating the star maps of their initiation ceremonies, turning their wrappings into celestial maps for the afterlife journey. The process of creating these burial linens was itself a form of worship. Temple texts from Edfu describe how priestesses would ritually harvest flax during the inundation season, singing hymns to Tate, the goddess of weaving, as they worked. The fibers were bleached not with harsh chemicals, but by laying them on limestone rooftops for precisely 42 days, 1 day for each nome of Egypt. The resulting fabric, known as menkhit, was so prized that when the Greek historian Herodotus described it, he mistakenly believed it was made from some unknown plant that grew only under moonlight. But white's power went beyond symbolism, it functioned as spiritual technology. Priestesses of Hathor were often buried with alabaster jars of natron salt sewn into their shroud's hem, creating a literal purification circuit around their bodies. The tomb of the Chantress Tomit at Deir el-Medina took this further. Her wrappings were found to contain thin sheets of mica between the layers, a mineral that conducts electrical charge. When Egyptologists reconstructed her burial garment and exposed it to desert winds, the static generated made the linen cling to the body in a way that eerily resembled the embrace of Nut, the sky goddess described in funerary texts. Perhaps the most profound expression of white's sacred role comes from the overlooked details. Many priestess mummies show traces of powdered gypsum rubbed into the skin before wrapping, not for preservation, but because Egyptian optics understood white's reflective properties. In flickering tomb lamps, these treated faces would have appeared to shift between expressions, creating the illusion of ongoing life. The famous white mummy of the Louvre still startles visitors with its luminous presence, not because of some ancient secret, but because we're witnessing the culmination of 1,000 subtle choices designed to transform mortal remains into something timeless. When we stand before these relics today, we're not just seeing burial customs, we're seeing the remnants of a belief system that understood color wasn't just seen, but experienced. A bridge between worlds woven thread by thread, ritual by ritual, until death itself became just another shade of light. The deep forest greens cloaking a Celtic druid's burial mound weren't just decorative, they were living armor, woven from the very essence of the sacred groves. Imagine standing at the edge of an ancient oak circle at dawn, watching mist curl around branches heavy with ivy and holly. That same vibrant green vitality was meticulously recreated in druidic tombs, transforming them into eternal sanctuaries. When a high-ranking druid was laid to rest, their body wasn't simply covered in earth, it was cradled in a bed of yew needles, wrapped in moss-dyed wool, and surrounded by oak branches still heavy with leaves. This wasn't a funeral, it was a translocation, moving the soul from one sacred green space to another. What made green so potent in druidic tradition? It all traced back to their belief that plants held memory. The Celts didn't just see evergreens as symbols of endurance. They believed fir trees could store wisdom in their resin, that ivy vines recorded centuries of rituals in their spiraling growth patterns. A druid buried with these plants wasn't just being honored, they were being hardwired into nature's own library. The famous Lindoman bog body revealed this connection in stunning detail. His stomach contents contained traces of mistletoe pollen, a sacred plant associated with vision quests. But here's what's extraordinary, his skin was stained green from weeks of exposure to sphagnum moss, as if the bog itself was trying to absorb his knowledge before releasing him to the afterlife. The craftsmanship behind these green burials reveals even deeper magic. Druidic tombs often incorporated a ghost wood, timber intentionally cut during the waning moon when sap receded, then carved with Ogham script and stained with chlorophyll-rich pastes. These markings weren't just inscriptions, they were botanical batteries designed to channel growth energy into the spiritual realm. At the Anglesey burial site in Wales, archaeologists uncovered a druid staff wrapped in birch bark still vibrant green after 2 millennia, preserved by copper salts from nearby streams, which druids called the dragon's blood for its alchemical properties. But green's role extended beyond individual graves to shape entire landscapes. Sacred groves were often planted over burial sites, with specific trees chosen as guardians, used for their toxicity to ward off grave robbers, holly for its prickly protection, oak for its connection to the thunder god Tyrannis. The roots of these trees became living runes, their growth patterns deliberately guided to spell protective charms in the earth. Modern LiDAR scans of Celtic burial mounds in Ireland show something astonishing. The surrounding tree rings grow in concentric patterns matching the solar calendar, proving these weren't random plantings but meticulously maintained energy grids. Perhaps the most profound testament to green's power comes from an unexpected source: druidic soul cages. These woven baskets of willow and hawthorn, found in Scottish and Breton tombs, held bundles of evergreen clippings mixed with the deceased's hair. As the plants grew through the weave in the damp soil, they literally stitched the soul into the landscape. Today, when botanists examine ancient yews standing sentinel over forgotten graves, many show genetic mutations found nowhere else, living legacies of druids who became one with their sacred groves, their wisdom still whispering in the rustle of leaves. The vast golden plains of the Mongol Empire didn't just reflect sunlight, they absorbed it, storing its brilliance in the very soil that nourished the Khan's horses. When a great leader like Genghis or Kublai was laid to rest, their burial sites became solar temples in miniature, designed not to hide their remains but to amplify their presence across eternity. Unlike the gilded sarcophagi of other cultures, Mongol Khans took gold's symbolism further. They didn't just wear it or display it. They transformed their entire tombs into alchemical vessels where death and light became indistinguishable. Gold in Mongol tradition wasn't merely decorative, it was the physical manifestation of Tengri, the eternal blue sky's divine favor. The famous secret burial of Genghis Khan, still undiscovered after 8 centuries, is said to have included a golden stupa filled with mercury, not as treasure but as a sacred conductor. Ancient texts describe how the liquid metal would ripple without wind, reacting to celestial movements like a compass needle pointing toward destiny. This wasn't superstition, it was sophisticated cosmology. The Mongols believed gold's molecular structure could channel the sun's energy, turning tombs into batteries that would sustain their rulers' spirits until the world needed them again. The craftsmanship behind these golden tributes reveals even deeper layers of meaning. Mongol artisans developed a technique called sun forging, where gold sheets were hammered between layers of wet leather under direct sunlight. The resulting foil, thinner than a dragonfly's wing, would be layered over burial garments until the deceased appeared clad in liquid light. When archaeologists uncovered the tomb of a lesser-known Khan in the Altai Mountains, they found his horse's skull similarly gilded not as sacrifice, but as a vehicle awaiting resurrection. The animal's eye sockets were filled with golden amber that still held trapped sunlight from 7 centuries past. Gold's role extended beyond individual graves to shape the empire's very geography. The Mongols constructed golden roads leading to royal burial sites not paved with metal, but with yellow flowers that bloomed in succession from spring to autumn, creating a living pathway that pulsed with seasonal energy. Satellite imagery has recently revealed these floral routes still trace invisible lines across the steppe, their patterns matching constellations visible during the Khan's reigns. Even the placement of grave goods followed celestial logic. Golden arrows pointed toward the winter solstice sunrise, while circular mirrors reflected the summer moon's path. Perhaps the most profound testament to gold's power comes from an unexpected source: the Mongols' conquered subjects. Persian historians recorded how artisans from Samarkand were forced to weave gold threads into silk shrouds using a special knot that couldn't be untied, symbolizing the Khan's unbreakable grip on power. Chinese scholars wrote of mercury-filled moats surrounding burial mounds, their surfaces reflecting the sky by day and glowing with submerged golden statues by night. These weren't just displays of wealth, they were psychological masterstrokes, ensuring even in death, the Khan's presence remained inescapable. The true genius of Mongol gold lies in its duality. It represented both the ultimate conquest and the purest form of surrender. When a Khan died, his golden burial mask wasn't hammered into stern nobility like Egyptian pharaohs, but shaped into a beatific smile, a recognition that even the greatest ruler must eventually yield to the sun's cycle. Today, when nomadic herders in Mongolia uncover flecks of gold in riverbeds, they still whisper that these are fragments of the Khan's laughter, scattered by the wind as a reminder that all power, no matter how brilliant, eventually returns to the earth that birthed it. High in the thin air of the Himalayas, where the sky presses close enough to touch, Tibetan lamas wrapped their dead in shades of blue so deep they seemed to swallow time itself. This wasn't just any blue, it was turbulence, the sacred hue of boundless wisdom, dyed into prayer flags that would flap ceaselessly long after the body had returned to the earth. When a revered monk was laid to rest, his corpse wasn't merely shrouded in blue fabric. it was dissolved into it, the color acting as a bridge between the finite and the infinite. Imagine a burial where the mourners aren't weeping, but painting, dipping their hands into vats of indigo mixed with crushed lapis lazuli, then pressing palm prints onto the monastery walls, each mark a living prayer for the lama's smooth passage through the bardo, the liminal state between death and rebirth. The Tibetans didn't stumble upon blue's significance by accident. In their cosmology, blue was the color of Akshobhir, the Buddha of mirror-like wisdom, the deity who reflects reality without distortion. This is why so many Thanka's sacred scrolls depict enlightened beings with sapphire skin, not as metaphor but as literal truth. A lama's blue burial shroud functioned the same way. It was a spiritual mirror designed to bounce back the illusions of samsara while absorbing only pure awareness. The famed sky burials of Tibet, where bodies are left on mountaintops for vultures, might seem devoid of color until you notice the blue-dyed cotter's ceremonial scarves tied around the remains, fluttering like fragments of the sky itself, ensuring the soul's ascent follows the same path as the scavengers upward into the vast and endless blue. But blue's power wasn't just symbolic. It was woven into the fabric of daily ritual. Monks preparing a lama's body for burial would grind precious stones into pigment, mixing them with barley beer to create a paint so vibrant it seemed to pulse. They'd then inscribe mantras across the corpse's forehead, chest, and palms in this luminous ink, each stroke a visual vibration of the sacred sound Om Mani Padme Hum. Modern spectrographic analysis of these pigments reveals something astonishing. Many contain trace amounts of copper, which would oxidize over time, turning the blue gradually greener. This wasn't deterioration, it was intentional alchemy. The Tibetans believed that as the color shifted, it mimicked the soul's own transformation from the deep blue of wisdom to the verdant hue of compassionate action in the next life. The most profound expression of blue's role lies in the Purba's ritual daggers buried with high lamas. Unlike the gleaming gold blades of other cultures, these were forged from meteoric iron, their dark surfaces inlaid with turquoise to form constellations mirroring the night sky of the lama's death. When plunged into the earth at burial sites, they weren't weapons, they were anchors, tethering the lama's wisdom to the physical world so it could guide future generations. Some monasteries still keep barrels of blue dye made from centuries-old recipes, passed down like living sutras. When a new flag is hung for a departed teacher, the monks don't just dip it in dye, they charge it, reciting prayers until the liquid hums with the same resonance as a singing bowl. What's haunting is how blue's meaning transcends even death itself. In the valleys of Mustang, where caves hold the mummified remains of meditation masters, the walls are frescoed with blue Dakini's celestial beings, whose outstretched hands hold not weapons but spools of thread, the same indigo-dyed fibers that lamas used to weave their burial garments. It's a reminder that in Tibetan Buddhism, death isn't an end but a knot in an endless tapestry where every blue thread connects one lifetime to the next. When the wind catches those prayer flags over a grave, it doesn't just carry prayers, it spins the loom of rebirth itself, weaving the departed back into the world in shades even brighter than before. From the celestial blues of Egyptian pharaohs to the sunlit golds of Thai kings, these colors were never just pigments, they were the deepest human emotions crystallized into hue. Every shade in these ancient tombs whispers a story we're still learning to hear. The lapis lazuli that cradled a pharaoh's journey wasn't simply rare, it was the night sky made solid, a piece of the heavens brought down to earth. The crimson ochre staining a Mayan ruler's bones wasn't just decoration, it was lifeblood preserved, a promise that death couldn't sever the thread of existence. These civilizations, separated by oceans and centuries, all arrived at the same profound truth. Color isn't passive, It can plead with gods, shield against demons, even rewrite destiny. What's astonishing is how these meanings transcended time. The same gold that adorned Mesopotamian kings as divine sunlight became the Thai emperor's ladder to enlightenment. Black, which cradled Chinese emperors in the wisdom of water, also cloaked Norse seers in the mysteries of the void. These parallels reveal something universal, a shared human instinct to wrap our greatest fears and highest hopes in colors that outlast stone or memory. When an Aztec noble was buried in jade or a Celtic druid in woven ivy, they weren't just preparing for death, they were composing their final poem, written in wavelengths of light. This tradition didn't vanish with the ancient world. Modern cultures still whisper this chromatic language: white for purity in Japanese funerals, green for renewal in African traditions. Even our own choices, the flowers we lay on graves, the colors we wear to memorials, carry echoes of these ancient beliefs. So here's a question that bridges millennia. If you could choose one color to speak for you beyond time, what would it say? Would it be the fierce red of enduring love, the calm blue of eternal peace, or some hue yet unnamed? The tombs we've explored prove color is more than light. It's the voice of the soul, ringing clear across centuries, and that conversation isn't over. Your thoughts might just add the next verse. Share them below, and let's keep unraveling history's most vibrant mysteries together. Don't forget to subscribe. Who knows what forgotten shades we'll uncover.